I like to discuss topics related to infrared photography. In this video, I'll take a look at Exposure X6, a raw photo editor, and how it works for processing infrared images. Exposure X6 is available for Mac and Windows, offers a 30-day free trial, and is available for $129 US. At the end of the video, I'll summarize the pros and cons for using Exposure X6 in infrared. So here's the interface for Exposure X6, and we start off in a grid view so we can look at a lot of our images. If we want to edit an image, we can double click that image to open it up. So the first thing that we want to do with an infrared image is do a color swap, and we have three methods that we could do that: a channel mixer, an invert, or a hue shift. There's no channel mixer in Exposure. If I try to do an invert, the invert method requires layers. So if I look up at layers, I can add another layer. But unfortunately, I cannot find a method to add a blend mode to a layer. I can add a layer, I can do all kinds of effects to it, I can mask it, I can change the opacity, but there's no capability to change the blend mode. And for the invert method to work, you need to change the blend mode to a hue blend or a color blend. So invert is out. So the other option that we would have would be a hue shift. And if I come down to color, you see we've got some color filters and some detailed color adjustments, but they all work on a per color basis. None of them are global, so I don't have a hue shift. What you can do with Exposure X6 is you can import a LUT. So if I come down in here and I select LUT, I can import them. You can see that I've imported 3 LUTs that I've made available. In a previous video, you can download these LUTs and use them with Exposure X6. I have the channel mixer LUT, which swaps reds and blues. I have a hue shift, which just takes the hue and shifts it 180 degrees for all colors. And then I have the invert, which is that invert and then blended, so it just swaps the colors that way. So I will pick the channel mixer. Okay, so now I have my colors swapped. And I can close down the LUT panel. Now what I want to do is get a white balance. So if I come up to basic, we can see the white balance controls in here. The color temperature slider runs from 2000 to 50,000, which seems like it has quite a range, but when you move up and down the range, you don't see a lot of changes in the images. In fact, when you get up above maybe 4,000 or 6,000 Kelvin, you don't see many changes at all. Most of the changes happen at the lower end of the spectrum. You know, if I get down to 2000, it gets pretty close to what I'd like, but it kind of caps out. But one of the things that's nice about Exposure is you can actually import a DCP profile created with the DNG profile editor. And I have another video that'll show you how to create one of those profiles with the Adobe DNG profile editor. So if I come up here to standard, I can select the profile that I've created for my camera. Each profile is custom to a specific model of camera. Doesn't look so great here, but if I then slide the color temperature, you can see that I now have some more control there. If I grab the picker, I can roll around the image and try to find a good value. And this kind of gets to one of the first challenges that we have with Exposure, and that is that the color picker is not great. And I'm going to assume that the color picker is fine under normal, visible light photography images, but maybe it's just the LUT that's causing it to have challenges. Color picker, not so good. I've had very mixed results. I've sometimes been able to get it to work, and sometimes I can't get it to work. So if I go back to the slider and adjust the slider, you can play with that a bit to get color temperature right. So I'll just pick a middle value, and then I will adjust the tint a little bit. Something that, you'd normally do with a picker, but I'll just have to kind of eyeball it. Okay, so now I have my white balance. So now let's say I wanted to, I've got other tone settings I can do, or I have an auto. If I click auto, then it'll set all these values, but it'll also change my white balance. So let me undo that. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. One of the things that's nice about Exposure is I can use this little hamburger menu next to the auto, and I can open this up, and it'll allow me to choose what's included and not included in an auto setting. So in this case, because the white balance is not so hot, I can uncheck white balance. And now if I do an auto setting, it'll auto my other tones, but it won't have an impact on the white balance. So I've noticed that my sensor's getting a little bit dirty, and it's something I've got to address. I've really got to clean it. But in the meantime, I've got some spots here that I can address. There's a healing tool that you can use right here, and I will adjust my size. It might be a little bit confusing with my yellow highlight here to be able to see. Let me turn that off here, just so I can see the healing brush better. There we go. kill a couple of these spots and remind myself to clean my sensor. Sometimes if you do a lot of spots, there can be a little bit of a delay, but it actually works quite well. Then I'll shut that off. Okay, so now if I want to make some adjustments to my colors, I can come down to this color panel and make some adjustments here. So first thing I want to note, there's a couple different controls here. You can group by color and then select one of these color swatches, or you can group by HSL, which will give you all of the colors this way and allow you to group by hue, saturation, or luminance. You can also turn compact on and off, which gives you different looks as well, depending on which of these you select. So lots of options here. One of the things that I find really interesting about these HSL controls in exposure is that there's a separate saturation controls for the shadows, midtones, and highlights. And the reason that I like that is because very frequently in infrared, I find that I'm oversaturating the shadows. If I saturate everything, I'm oversaturating the shadows. And that's where there's a big potential for infrared images to look unrealistic, because shadows don't normally have a lot of color. So for example, if I come down to, let's zoom in on this image a bit, we'll zoom in on the tree. And if I was to oversaturate this image, then you'd see a lot of saturation coming into the tree. But if I was to go down to the color section and under saturation here, I'm in group by color, compact is off, I can go to shadows and I can reduce the saturation in the shadows. And in many cases, I'll find that that produces a more interesting look. And then if I want to increase my saturation, instead of doing it up here in this global saturation, let me close basic down, I could instead, let me go back to fit to screen. Instead, I could use this to increase the saturation just in the highlights or in the midtones, which I think is going to be a more pleasing look, as opposed to in the shadows where, like in this case, I'm starting to see color in the ground and in the tree trunk. So I'll reduce the saturation in the shadow. So I really like this feature, this capability to alter the saturation in the shadows, midtones, and highlights individually. Now, let's go back and group by HSL, and I'll make this compact, and let's play with some of the colors some more. So there is a picker that you can use here. It's this little icon. Let me turn my highlighter back on, and I can use this to grab a portion of the image and then make an adjustment. So if I have hue selected and I select the sky, I could drag up or down, and you can see it will pick the reds and it will change the hue in the sky. And this works okay. Sometimes, like in the sky, it's not so bad. Sometimes when I'm selecting on certain elements in the screen, it won't pick the colors very well. And the other problem is that there tends to be a lot of noise. If I get too extreme, let me go back to 1:1 and zoom in a bit to the sky. You can see how there's a lot of noise here. If I go back and zero everything out, if I just move the slider a little bit, then I can get some of the color effect. But if I go to an extreme, then sometimes I'll see some noise. So you've kind of got to be careful here. And I'm not sure if this is normal for exposure or if it's probably a side effect of using the LUT is what I'm guessing, is that we're seeing some of this color noise. So you kind of be careful there. If I go and select something, a color in the tree, let's say I want to change the color of the tree and drag that up and down. I'm dragging up and down, but I didn't even land on a color. I didn't even get anything. Let me try this again. And this one picked both reds and magentas. And so the color picker, much like the color picker in the white balance, doesn't seem to do a good job of grabbing the right colors. And the color picker here doesn't seem to do a good job. So that's definitely challenging. So I'm going to zero these out, and then I'll show you some examples of managing these colors directly. So I know that these colors are swapped. So I'm going to guess that the color of this tree, the leaves in the tree, is probably going to be more like the cyans and the blues. So if I start making adjustments there, then I can see some color change. And then the same thing with the sky. I could adjust the reds and the oranges to change the color of the sky using these sliders. The orange has a good deal of effect there if I want to go to sort of a teal color in the sky. And of course you could then, use these adjustments and turn compact on and off to find the exact method that you want to use. The other option that exists in the color panel is this advanced color editor, which pops up a whole nother window that you can use. I think is very powerful, but unfortunately I think it suffers from the same challenges that I'm seeing otherwise. The color picker sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. The way that this works is that you select a color that on the left that you want to convert from, you select a color on the right that you want to convert to. So if I use the color picker to select the sky, that's the color I want to convert from. This is the color I want to convert to. But if I go over to here and I drag this around, so there's lots of fine grain controls in here. I think that this is a very powerful tool, and this is something that you may want to leverage, but it's going to take a lot of practice to get the hang of, to be able to get the colors to look the way that you want, especially because of the effects of the LUT. But if you start to get comfortable with the effects of these controls, then you could have a profound effect. So if you like exposure and you really want to play with your colors, then I think there's a lot of capability in this advanced color editor. There is another panel farther down here called IR. Oh, what's that? That could be really interesting. So I go into here and we'll look at the presets because that'll give us an idea of what we're looking at. So there's a glow. So you can use this to add a glow to your image. So that's kind of nice. I like the effect there. If I go down into some of the other effects farther down, then, oh, the colors start to get a little bit crazy. I think what's happening here is that these presets are designed for visible light photos to create the look of infrared, but if you use them on an already infrared photo, then not so much. If I look down to one of these first three, glow, and I look at the values, you can see that I've got some color contrast, and I think this is the one that's causing the colors to go a bit wonky. But if you look at the halation opacity and the halation spread, that's where the glow effect is being set. So you could either pick one of these presets or you could make these adjustments to yourself to get the kind of glow that you'd like. Over on the left-hand side, we have the presets panel. Let's slide this up and give us some more room here. Lots of presets that are available in exposure. One of the ones that's interesting is there's a black and white infrared. And again, this is used not so much for infrared photography, but it's used with visible light photography to create the look of infrared. These presets could actually be useful with infrared photos just to give you a whole different variety of looks. There's also a section down farther called color infrared, and this is another case where these are a number of effects that are designed to make visible light photos the look of infrared, even though you can't truly have the look, but it's a stylistic thing, trying to match some of these infrared films of the past. But again, these are less applicable to your digital infrared photos, but the black and white presets could be interesting. Up here, you can click this plus sign to add to a preset, so you can create the name, put it in a category, even give it a description, and then you can select all of the values for what you would like to include in this preset. So that's a nice handy feature. So the preset panel here in Exposure X6 has a ton of options available, the customizability to create your own presets as well. So let's talk about the pros of using Exposure X6 for infrared photos. First of all, the program has a very clean user interface. It's very easy to use. Maybe the exception is that advanced color editor, but for most of the basic stuff, it's very straightforward. It's really nice that the program supports the DHC profiles. That's certainly very convenient and gives you more flexibility in your white balancing. The support for LUTs is a nice addition, and that gives you the ability to do color swapping. The IR panel has some nice options for creating a glow. And then, of course, the presets panel gives you a lot of great options. What is not so good about Exposure X6 for infrared photography? Well, there is no channel mixer. There's no layer blend mode to do an invert, so you are limited to using LUTs. And I think that with exposure, that might create some limits on how much you can adjust the hue of a color. If you are not going to do dramatic changes to the hue, then that's fine. Or if you're comfortable working in the advanced color editor, then that's the way to go. But otherwise, you might be a little bit limited because of the LUTs. So it's unfortunate that those other modes aren't available. The color picker is pretty inconsistent. Didn't work very well for white balancing. It doesn't work very well for selecting colors. I suspect that the color picker works fine for normal photos. It's just that the additional challenges of using a LUT are maybe some complexities that haven't been accounted for in the program. The HSL can be very noisy, and then the presets are interesting, but the color presets aren't very useful, so just be aware of that. They're mostly used for imitation infrared. So there you go. That's a look at Exposure X6 and its use for infrared photography. If you find these videos helpful in your infrared photography journey, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment. Do you have any topics related to infrared photography that you'd like to see addressed? Leave a comment below. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks.